Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, FIDF followers. We are so sorry for the wait this morning, but we are with you. FIDF is so honored to have strong relationships with all of Israel's soldiers. And when October 7th happened and hundreds of thousands of reservists answered the call to step up to defend our home, we were honored to step up with them to support the IDF's unprecedented needs. The experience of our reservists is nothing short of the epitome of selflessness. Their devotion, their leaving of their families, their jobs, their personal interests behind to defend us all is so inspiring and heroic, truly. Today, I am honored to introduce you to our esteemed guest, First Sergeant Nimrod, who is not only a devoted family man, a husband, a proud parent, a professional. He is someone whose experience really represents all of those who volunteered to serve when our home was attacked. With being also a very impressive professional, he'll be bringing us his unique experience and his insights into the war and just the human experience of what it's like to be a soldier during this period. It's my honor to introduce First Sergeant Nimrod. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry for the mishap. I had it a bit later. In the country, but I understand it's daylight saving today. So
daylight savings catches Americans. So you don't need to. We're grateful that in Israel you guys were able to react to our time change. So thank you.
Yes.
I'd love to begin just if you could share with us what your experience has been as a reservist. You know, if you could start with October 7th and just share with us, you know. All of the things that happened that caused you to make the decision to volunteer when this horrific attack occurred.
Yeah, I've told this story a few times. Maybe I'll start a different way this time. First of all, I just want to say to everyone who's listening here, October 7th was so horrific and so unfathomable on a human level that I think that the baseline desired response for every single person in Israel, and I think for every single person who couldn't bear to digest the stories that were coming in from Gaza and from what happened in the outskirts of Gaza, the baseline was to pull a Rambo, to just, you know, if any one of us could take their weapon, even if we don't know how to fire one, and walk into Gaza and release the hostages. I think that that's what people in their mind wanted to do. They just want it solved immediately. We were almost all reduced to being like children, just trying to make it disappear, even though at the very same time, the adults in Israel, and I think also around the world, understood that this was actually the beginning of a long and grueling period for all of us. And when that is the baseline, when the baseline is, I want to save everyone if I could, then nobody here actually feels like they're doing much. So we get some congratulations for volunteering, soldiers who are beyond the enemy lines are respected for risking their lives, for leaving their jobs, but none of us feel like we're doing anything, actually. I would think that,
like, none of us feel like no one feels like it's enough. Is that what you mean?
No one feels like it's enough. During the first day, there were a lot of hero stories of people who rescued families, etc. They just drove in there to the party and drove people out. And when they were injured and in hospital, they were saying, I should have driven back and saved more. So this is everyone's disposition, and is still everyone's disposition. So many of these talks begin with this empathy or compliment, and whilst, you know, I nod and I say thank you, in reality I don't feel like I'm doing anything, and a lot of Israelis don't feel that way as well. But it's certainly better than the alternative. And the alternative was my October 7th. I am 41. I'm a father of two. I have two daughters. One is 9, one is 5. And I've actually been released from reserves duty for 4 years. The unit that I serve in, which I can't disclose much detail about, is a highly technological unit that has an immense impact on the battlefield. It's quite a deterrent for Hamas, and because it is technological, whilst I participated, I joined it in January 2001, and I participated in the Second Lebanon War in reserves for about 60 days. The Operation Cast Lead and Operation Protective Edge in reserves duty. I was released in 2019 because I was rendered technologically obsolete. So I didn't have a role, really. Even if I were to show up in the unit, there was not much I could do. So when October 7th happened, what I was faced with was the precipice of depression. I'm a corporate lawyer, I'm a partner in one of Israel's largest law firms, and I work with the startup companies here, which I knew were also going to take a very big hit. And because of the corporate law hours, I don't have many hours at home, so I couldn't really impose myself on my girls and suddenly become this very present educator at home. And as it was, I didn't feel like the legal profession was challenging 15 years in. So I was in search of meaning anyway, call it a midlife crisis. And now this thing happens and nothing has any meaning. Nothing has any meaning. The deliberations that you had about meaning become meaningless. The deliberations themselves. And what that does to a person is it just leaves them in bed. So that's where I was on October 7th. Our family was on holiday in Maleh Hamisha, and it woke us up in the hotel, and we had to drive away from the hotel. We had a scary moment there. I might tell you about that later. But when we got home, I just went to bed and I stayed there through October 7th, 8th, and 9th. And my wife, thank God, she took care of of our daughters. But I was like stuck in bed and I wasn't getting up. Now, I grew up in Australia, and my friends started texting me, "Can we help? Can we do something to help?" And on October 7th and October 8th, I answered them, "There's nothing you can do. The world is over. We are going to suffer every single day from the stories about the hostages. We are going to be counting the dead for months, and this war is not going to end. We're going to have to fight it for a year or a year and a half." And I just basically shrugged them off, doom scrolled, fell asleep. Shrugged people off, doom scrolled, fell asleep. On October 9th, I woke up to a Facebook post by a colleague of mine. He's a venture capitalist who was the Minister of Technology in Israel, actually, Science and Technology. He's Al-Shai, and if I advise people here to look him up. And he's a very highly esteemed professional in the Israeli startup scene, and a former minister because he contributed to the government. And a friend of mine, he was on the board of directors of a few companies that I represented as a lawyer. He's 55 to my 41 or thereabouts. And I wake up on October 9th and I see a post of his with a picture of his beautiful son in the morning. And I see, wow, that's a beautiful boy. And then I read the text and I completely fall apart. He's telling us basically that his son was killed on October 7th, protecting by himself with another two soldiers one of the towns that wasn't attacked. They had blocked the entrance to the town with a jeep. His two friends got critically wounded, and he actually saved their lives, and then he got shot dead whilst protecting the village, the kibbutz. And I saw that post, just such a kid with so much potential by someone who I know and respect. I know this kid is I know the waste in that. And then I read the text, and the text was very inspiring. The father was basically calling for action, positive action, contribution, not only retaliation. He was already setting up an initiative called Next October, whereby Israel will avenge October 7th a variety of different ways, but one of them would be the incorporation of 1,400 new startup companies in the name of every single one of the fallen, to show that we continue to innovate. And that post sort of just sprung me out of bed, because I normally did live by this mantra of turning negatives into positives. And the next time I got a message from a friend of mine from Australia asking how they could help, I told them that they could help if they supported what some of the needs that Israel has in this war, which is the ability to fight a long war. That is the one thing that we haven't actually done over the course of our 75 years here. We haven't fought a long war since the War of Independence. Even the Yom Kippur War was 17 days. My friend said, of course, we'll help. At 1 p.m. on October 9th, I texted my friend from the unit who was also out of reserves. But only recently I asked him, who's the unit commander? He gave me a name. I called the unit commander. I had a volunteer form at 1:30. I had a Tzav Shmone, which is already an instruction to show up at 1:45. At 4 p.m. I was at the base. And I was there for I was serving in this unit for 100 straight days until we asserted full control of the Gaza Strip, and my specific role was no longer necessary. And during that period, my initiative to make myself useful, because otherwise they wouldn't have taken me, was to build a budget for raising funds from my friends from Australia, so that we could support the unit in its ability to withstand a long war. My unit is a very high capacity unit, so we built living barracks for the different officers in the unit. We built a WeWork for them so that they could actually work while they're there. It's not a base close to the center, but it's not a base far inside Gaza. So it's somewhere in the middle of the road. So they could work and retain their livelihood. We hired a performance psychologist to prepare them for the missions, and I oversaw the use of the budget, and I got myself an operative role as responsible for intelligence. I was collecting intelligence about the evolution of Hamas behavior over the course of the war, and instructing our soldiers in the unit what Hamas was expected to be doing in 4-hour intervals.
Fascinating. I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, we know that you have. I appreciate you giving us an overview, because I know that your role was highly classified, and so I appreciate you giving us just sort of like a sense of the sort of thing that you were doing. And it's amazing the way that you turned around that depression in such a short amount of time, and took action. I mean, that character of the Israeli people, I feel like we saw that wholesale, like that was the reaction of the entire country. How do you feel that, how did you tell this decision or share this decision with your family? They've had you around, they thought that they were done sending you to reserve duty, and now all of a sudden you have volunteered to step back into things when it's most dangerous. How did your young girls cope? What did your wife say, your parents? What was the reaction, of your immediate circle?
I was just about to thank my wife. My wife was extremely supportive. She had the uniform in my bag prepared within about 20 minutes after I called the unit commander, and the uniform was, we had to find it, and the shoes and stuff. In retrospect, maybe it's because she had enough of seeing me laying on the bed the whole time for the first 2 days. But no, she felt like she was getting an opportunity to contribute as well by giving me the full opportunity to go and volunteer, and she was extremely supportive. My mother was 22 years a military veteran. She's the first female appointed lieutenant colonel in the army by way of by merit. So she understands meaningful military service, and she supported me, even though she did have her concerns. Everyone in uniform was targeted, but I was not going into Gaza, so we were all being bombarded at the time anyway. And my daughters were a combination of afraid and proud. afraid and proud, but I think they were more proud than afraid in retrospect, if I recall. Yeah.
If we could go back to something that you just sort of glossed over when you started. I'm not familiar with Ma'aleh Hamishim. I'm sure that, many of our viewers may not be familiar with it either. Can you tell us where that is in the country when October 7th, when everything was unfolding, where you were, and perhaps share the story that you alluded to that was a bit of a scare?
So this was Simchat Torah. We'd had a week off, and we promised ourselves one night with the girls in a nice place where they could play. And we took a hotel in Ma'aleh HaChamisha, which is not far away from Jerusalem. It's nowhere near the Gaza Strip. And we went there on Friday night. We had a beautiful Friday night. We also have a friend who lives there, who eventually, by the way, also went to reserves duty, and actually, as the head of the legal department in the army, basically was part of the representative team in The Hague. He wrote the speeches and the response letters to the ICJ. But we went to this hotel, just a nice hotel, and at 6:30 in the morning on Saturday, my older daughter woke us up and said, "We're being bombarded." And Shani told her, "There's absolutely no chance. This place has never been bombarded. Ma'aleh HaChamisha has never had rocket fire fired to it." And we got up and we understood that there were in fact sirens, and we didn't know what was going on. We understood it was very weird, but we didn't know the extent of it. So we went to breakfast because we were up. The hotel had a buffet. As my wife and I are getting breakfast for our daughters, my older daughter hears about the vans inside Israel killing people. So like the people in the tables are talking about it. And she picks up her phone. She's a 9-year-old with a phone, and texts her class group that there are vans of murderers all over the country, because she thought she needed to warn them. So the first time we heard about the vans was when my wife received a text from one of the parents saying, "You got to get your daughter off WhatsApp because she's scaring the entire class." And she didn't understand why, and that's how we found out. We were just getting food. Then the sirens went off again, and then we started getting the news, and it was getting more and more horrible. At one point, we decided that we shouldn't stay in the hotel because it wasn't there were no bomb shelters. So we decided to drive for about 5 minutes to our friend's place in Ma'aleh HaChamisha to be at his home where he has a bomb shelter. That 5-minute drive, we had no idea what the extent of the attack was. We thought that there could be vans everywhere, including around Ma'aleh HaChamisha. We thought that maybe they came in also from the West Bank or from Jerusalem. And we were driving frantically, and as we were driving, another rocket was fired in the direction of Ma'aleh HaChamisha. And we arrive at the gate of this kibbutz. This gate is never closed, never. And now it's closed, and it's got armed guards that are ready to pounce because they already know what's happening. And there's a siren, but I'm driving, but there's a car in front of us that's in front of the gate, and the doors open, and the driver is lying down on the ground because there's a rocket being fired. As the driver's lying down on the ground, the rocket hits the side of the mountain, because there's not even an iron dome in this area that really tries to protect this place. So the rocket hits the side of the mountain, and we hear this like clank, this like almost like a gunshot, because it was a few hundred meters away. And I thought to myself, okay, that was a rocket. It hit the side of the mountain. This person is protecting themselves because it's a siren. I'll stop behind them, and then we'll go into the town, into the moshav. And my wife misinterpreted what she was seeing and what she was hearing. And she said to me, she whispered to me, "Nimrod, they just killed that driver. They just fired at the driver." So now I thought to myself, well, if there's even a 2% chance that she's right, I have to do something. So I swirled over and I tried to overtake the gate through the the gravel, and the guards started running after us, and my daughter started screaming and yelling, and they were guns out. And then I just pulled my head out the window and I screamed my friend's name, the guy we were supposed to visit. And they said, "Well, you should have just said so. The gate's over here." And then that was that. But that sort of pressure, that we went from like vacation to that sort of pressure in with my wife, like saying they're shooting at us right now. They just killed that person in about 5 minutes.
Wow. Wow. What a wild experience. You know, were you away from your family for the 100 days, or were you in a position where you were able to see your family intermittently?
I was able to see my family intermittently, not every day. I was in the army for several days each stint, but I was able to see them. By the way, it would have been horrible not to see them. I'm very happy and privileged to have seen them and spent time with them. However, actually, returning from war to civil life to war to civil life like that is a mental challenge in and of itself. The soldiers in Gaza don't have their mobile phones. They're completely disconnected. They're in the war. The hardest moments for me were to get out of the base and into the cab and listen to the news, listen to the arguments over who's responsible, to critique of how fast we're moving, and all that stuff, and slowly also to critique by the international by the international public about now we're genocidal maniacs and stuff like that. That was very difficult to hear coming back home intermittently and turning on the news. It's almost like there was a period, I think, where there was, not as much support for the Vietnam War. Imagine a soldier in Vietnam having to return every few days to the United States, smacking this to protest or stuff like that, and then having to go back just every few days. It's a very difficult mindset shift.
What an interesting analogy that is. And it's so interesting as someone who, was in intelligence and was busy, and understands deeply the length that the IDF goes to in order to protect civilian life. Like hearing those kinds of allegations, how would hearing that misinformation, how would that affect you? And how would you deal with the need to sort of put it aside and focus, or then suddenly become Abba and warm again? Like how did you do that?
Not always very successfully. I do want to say that the IDF took I think it was about 3 weeks before the ground maneuver. During that 3-week period, the IDF prepared for the ground maneuver. And I was involved in that preparation, and I sort of witnessed it and prepared for my role in it. The ground operation in Gaza is, I think, by far the most ambitious, courageous, thorough, and uncompromising plan that Western military could have selected in response to the atrocities of October 7th. And I'm not saying that because soldiers don't want to kill civilians. Soldiers don't want to kill civilians. I'm saying because the plan involves, at every juncture, at every what if, the plan involves adding additional risk to Israeli soldiers in order to save lives. Adding additional risk to Israeli soldiers in order not to play Hamas's game. Hamas prepared for this a very long time, and we had to devise a battle plan whereby we wouldn't play by their rules and on their time, and that requires a lot of courage and doing everything against previous plans and outside of the box. And a lot of that is geared to saving the lives of, to preventing the loss of civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. In terms of what I felt when I heard the international public, I actually went from initially I was so angry, and I was so angry that we got to this, and I felt the urge to to be head on into the war, and I felt like this was the world's problem. The misinformation is not even Israel's problem. I'm even quoted as saying the world needs Israel. Israel isn't here because of the Holocaust. Israel is here because Israel is necessary now. We innovate, we bring tech. We're the only democracy in the Middle East. If you want to close us down, you got to close Apple, Google, Intel, and Microsoft. So, and the values that come with the Jewish people, and probably your conscience due to what happened in the Holocaust. But Israel is here because it's relevant and necessary now. So if your countries can't get your stuff together, and you've got ignorance over there, so much so that you're claiming symmetry between the two sides, then that is your problem, and you better take care of your education systems. So that was me during the first month or two, probably the first month. Afterwards, it became clear that misinformation. It settled, and something that I always knew because I'm in this space, that misinformation is actually probably one of the biggest threats to our society as a whole, and we need to deal with it. My initial attempt to deal with it was on Twitter, and that wasn't very helpful. I'm very happy that I'm off Twitter now. But now I actually try to deal with it in very original ways, which I'm happy to elaborate on now or later if you're interested. But there are ways to deal with misinformation that are liberating, in my opinion.
I mean, if you want to share one tip that you feel has been especially effective, then I'm sure everybody is looking to affect their spheres of influence as best they can. And I think that now we all know and agree that neglecting the misinformation that's out there or leaving it to somebody else just actually creates a void that is then filled with more misinformation. So I feel that, even this briefing series is an effort for us to share information that is reliable and authentic and primary with people who are otherwise inundated with misinformation or unreliable or half-truths or skewed facts or any number of ways that are essentially propaganda against Israel. You really have to go to the primary sources, to the people who are there, who are creating the history, and they're the ones where you get the best information. If you found something that you found especially effective, bevakasha.
Then I'll gladly share it with you. By the way, you're getting this input from someone who's really here, but also my role was to actually learn about what was happening with Hamas. So I feel very confident about my opinions about them. Read the book Misbelief by Dan Ariely. It was published not long ago. The book Misbelief about Dan Ariely will give you tools to deal with someone who is spewing misinformation. It will surprise you. It will relieve you of the need to argue facts. There's no point in arguing facts, but it will require you to empathize with that person and to try to, first of all, play their game, but normally with more question marks than exclamation points. Our roles when we are arguing with a propagandist or someone with misinformation, our roles is not to convince them of our opinion and of the facts, that they have no relevance. Our roles are to instill doubt in their opinion. And there are ways to do that if you read the book Misbelief. Once you instill doubt, those people that doubt is going to stay with them, and then come the day to protest and to yell child killers, they're going to stay at home and watch Netflix. And that's the roles that's where I think we should take this if we're arguing and if we're dealing with people who are spewing misinformation. The book Misbelief is really good. I don't have shares in it. I don't just read it and it was good. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fantastic. We appreciate the recommendation. we're closing in on at the end of our time here, but if there's anything in all of your experience, working in intelligence, I know we can't get into specifics, but working in intelligence, having the expertise that you do have about the character of Hamas and the way that they operate and the way that they manipulate the public, if there's one thing that you feel that our audience can take to people that is not out there enough, what action item would you give us to share with people about who this enemy is and how Israel has risen to tackle this very challenging enemy?
Yeah. So Hamas is actually a relatively young organization. It's been around, if I'm not mistaken, only about 35 years. That's not a long time to develop a culture for any organization, really. They don't really have a DNA per se. They have one thing that's been unique to them all 35 years. They're divided basically into two parts: a social welfare sort of part that to the Gazans and to the Palestinians, normally in times of peace and quiet, takes care of them. They are friendly to them. When we say the Palestinians support Hamas and we blame them for supporting a terrorist organization, we also need to understand that they don't see that face of Hamas on a daily basis. They see a different face. Of course, now that Hamas is looting all of their humanitarian aid, now they're seeing the truth. But in days of less conflict, Hamas endears itself through its social organization. Hamas's military wing is funded, obviously, by Iran, predominantly, and Hamas's military wing, the terrorist wing, that wing was always existed to only be able to create havoc and terror. They do not exist to be able to achieve military objectives like conquering land or doing any of that. They exist to terrorize, to instill fear and terrorize. Why? Because when they instill fear and terrorize people in the region, countries are unable to reach agreements. For example, the Abraham Accords or the agreement with Saudi Arabia. For example, the Oslo Accords that they tried to block in 1995 with their suicide bombings back then. So that organization, in order to instill terror, what it does is it divides itself into tiny compartments of people that don't know about each other. And those tiny compartments of people are not very skilled. They're one-trick ponies. They know what they need to do on a given day. And in the 90s, they would send groups of 2 or 3 and they would conduct a suicide bombing. What happened with Hamas when it was able to stay in power and basically take Gaza hostage was that it had many years to orchestrate just 50 or 60 operations just like those suicide bombings without us knowing, because none of those cells knew about each other when they attacked Israel on October 7th. It all happened at the same time. So they basically managed to orchestrate this one grand concert, but they are incapable of following through. And that's why they lost their land within 2 days. They were supposed to negotiate for land or for parts of Israel and conquer some of the towns. And once their leaders are taken out, they tend to just give up. They don't. They're not as full of conviction as they present themselves to be, and that is because they were always just, doing it for the cell that they were sort of in and for the community that they were trying to get some pride in. So it's going to be remembered as a challenging opponent because of because of the atrocities that we can't really understand from October 7th. And it's going to be remembered as a challenging opponent because its leaders do not care that every single one of its soldiers will have to die until this thing is over. So we're fighting this well beyond the point of surrender of the enemy, right? The enemy would have surrendered by now in any other war. But in reality, it's just an unfortunate group of people to have to control the Gaza Strip and to have to deal with right now, and we're going to have to follow through on it until the very end.
Absolutely. Well, Thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak with you and to hear your insights. And thank you for your service to Israel, for volunteering and for leaving your incredible profession behind and your family in order to protect us all. We are forever in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your support of Israel. Please continue. This will be a long war, but we're making every effort to make every day count.
Thank you. And the IDF is doing an incredible job where it's our honor to support every single soldier. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best. As we draw this conversation to a close, I just want to again express our deepest gratitude to First Sergeant Nimrod for generously sharing his experience, providing us with a glimpse into the challenges and the dedication of the hundreds of thousands of reservists who volunteered during this war and who remain on standby. Even the soldiers who were released remain on standby for whatever comes in the future. These are family people, incredible professionals. It's amazing to hear the character of the people who are defending our country. We learned about their incredible sacrifices today, and Israel is full. The population is full of these ordinary heroes. It's a powerful, powerful reminder of the importance of supporting our soldiers, not just in words, but in action. As First Sergeant Nimrod said, we're in it for the long haul. This is not, our soldiers continue to face the enemy day in, day out. Even if their plight has exited the news cycle, FIDF is with them, and we are playing a crucial role in providing the resources and the support that they need in order to win. If you've been moved today and you want to make a tangible impact, consider extending your support. You can make a difference. You can absolutely make a difference. Together, we can help them win. Our unity is our superpower. Am Yisrael Chai forever.